Hi guys, how you doing? I just thought I'd do a video just to cover some of the main points that we discussed in the wee online Zoom chat that we had last week, which went on for quite a long time. So I thought it'd be better just to make a fresh video, um, to try to summarise the points we covered. So, the main thing I think that was probably worth discussing was that most folk, when they come to sign up to the sessions, or for anyone really that goes on a diet or wants to take part in an exercise regime, usually one of the most common reasons is people cite is that they want to lose a wee bit of weight. And that's not universal, but it's the sort of most common reason. So that's why that's going to be the main focus of the video. It may not necessarily apply to you, but most of the points should help offer a broader understanding anyway of metabolism and things like that. So first of all, it's important to know that unfortunately it's just human nature or biology that it's probably a bit easier to gain weight than it is to lose weight. Well, it's not a bit easier, it's definitely easier. And on top of that, the body has a natural, just human beings, or the body has or nature, any nature has a natural sort of inbuilt process to protect itself, and to persevere with its environment in order to protect itself to survive, I guess. And that probably, you can apply that to any sort of living being, I think. And therefore, when it comes to, like, if you gain weight, for example, when it comes to trying to then lose that weight, it kind of goes against the body's inbuilt desire. Because it wants to maintain what it has, it wants to protect what it has, or hold on to what it has. So right away, you're probably slightly fighting against the natural processes that the body wants to do, which is to maintain itself in case it needs it. Your body doesn't know that it might not need the extra fat stores one day, so it wants to hold on to them as much as it can. So weight loss is hard, and you're fighting against biology in order to do it. Okay, so on a fundamental level, everyone sort of understands the basic concept of, in order to lose weight, you need to, like, consume less calories, you need to burn and all that sort of jazz. But beyond that, it's a bit more complicated than that, and there's certainly things you can do on a practical level that can make that goal of weight loss, or fat loss specifically, we should probably try and say, more achievable. So first off, I want you to understand that your metabolism, which is the amount of, so when people talk about calories and all that, they talk about, it's in relation to your metabolism, okay, and the amount of energy or calories that you need to take in each day to maintain your current weight, based around the amount you expend on any given day. So your metabolism is kind of, or your basic metabolism, anyway, your basic metabolic rate is dictated by your current weight. Other things too, like your age and your height and things like that. But your current weight, age, height, these things all sort of come together to determine what your estimated basic metabolic rate is. Okay, so what unfortunately happens is that as you lose weight, there is a process which means that as you lose weight, your basic metabolic rate you also lose some of that. It drops. So it drops in line with any weight loss, okay? Because as I just said, weight loss is one of the determining factors in what your basic metabolic rate is, or your weight, sorry, is your determining factor. So if that comes down, then your basic metabolic rate also comes down. And that is basically your body's way of adapting to its environment, i.e. its reduced weight and its reduced intake. And it does that, as I mentioned at the start, as a protective mechanism. Okay, so if your basic metabolic rate drops, it means that there'll come a point where, like, it will be harder for you to then lose more weight, and because the amount you need to take in on a given day to maintain that new weight has dropped from where it was before. So it's a protective mechanism. So in other words, the more weight you start to lose, the more your body will start to fight against that by adapting and dropping its basic metabolic rate. And that process is called, depending on what you read, it's adaptive thermogenesis. It's the adaptive process. Okay, now it can be, you can influence adaptive thermogenesis in a positive and negative way, or in a way that increases metabolic rate as well as decreasing it. But for all intents and purposes, when it comes to talking about weight loss, like we're talking about it reducing. Okay, so that's first and foremost one of the reasons, or one of the main reasons why weight loss is difficult. Because if you go on a diet, you reduce your intake to achieve some weight loss, you'll achieve it, but then your body will adapt to that new weight loss, and those reduced calories that you'd started taking, they will no longer have the effect of before, and that's why you then plateau. And the only way to then get further or achieve further weight loss is to then manipulate the conditions again further, so that you're again going below your metabolic baseline or metabolic rate, or try and increase your metabolic rate by doing exercise. So that's where these variables come in about like exercising more or eating less, and it's an ongoing, continual, transient changing process, depending on what progress you do and don't make. Okay, so hopefully this is making a little bit of sense. So there are things. One of the things we discussed was that there are things that you can do to positively influence adaptive thermogenesis, or to slow it down. Okay, because you can't, it's unavoidable to a degree, but there's ways of slowing it down. So one of the things that's been shown, and this is sort of new science, so we're only talking in the last 10 years, 5 years, and as recently as even last year, there was a really few studies done on it. So what we do know is that a higher protein diet, I know we've been on and on about this before, but a higher protein diet can help combat the adaptive thermogenesis process. Partly because one of the things that comes into play with adaptive thermogenesis isn't just a drop in basic metabolic rate, but it's also it can affect like hormones and the emissions of hormones. So when you eat less food and you go on a diet, you start to get hungry. So we know that hunger hormones increase as you diet, again because your body doesn't want to lose weight. Really, it wants to protect what it's got, so it will send signals from the brain, or secrete them to the brain, saying, right, we're hungry, going to go and eat some food, please. And one of those main hormones is called ghrelin, which is a hunger hormone. So as you get hungrier, as you diet more, as you do more exercise, we know from sort of different studies that ghrelin starts to increase, and that is in an attempt of your body to eat more. And you can't really fight against that for too long. But you can combat it in some ways. So we know that protein, for example, combats that. So higher protein diets combat the secretion of ghrelin. So if you start to get hungrier and hungrier, ghrelin goes up. Higher protein diets dim that sort of, if you want to call it the backcall, right? It dims it down, and it can't be heard to the same extent. So it's a quieter call from ghrelin when you've got a higher protein diet. So therefore, you're less likely to want to suddenly crave lots of foods, or to overeat or to overconsume, that kind of thing. So that's one of the reasons why a high protein diet is most effective when it comes to achieving sustainable, successful weight loss, because you'll be sort of like fighting against your body's own desires to like eat more and release ghrelin, because it will combat the secretion of that. Okay, so there's one example right there, and that doesn't ring as true for high fat diets, for example, or high carbohydrate diets. They all secrete them in different levels, but high protein diet specifically has the most profound effect on ghrelin, okay, the hunger hormone. So secondly, if I remember at the start, I said that like it's your weight that determines your metabolism or your basic metabolic rate primarily, not specifically necessarily how much of that weight is fat and how much of it is muscle. Okay, so there's a bit of a myth to think that it's all about the muscle, and the more muscle you've got, the bigger your basic metabolic rate, versus if you were how much fat you've got. If the weight's the same, there's not going to be a massive differential in terms of the basic metabolic rate. And I'm sort of highlighting the word basic because there is other things that come into play, which we'll go over in a wee second. But in terms of the actual basic metabolic rate, it doesn't matter really how much of that weight is muscle percentage versus fat percentage. Having said that, what we do like to consider, and this is, I'm going to try and round it into sort of a continuous loop, this is that if we know that weight loss reduces your metabolic rate over time by adaptive thermogenesis, therefore making it harder to continuously achieve longer term weight loss or fat loss. I'm using the terms interchangeably because unfortunately that's what happens sometimes, and they're not the same thing as such specifically. So if we know that, you could argue, and this is where I'm hoping to go with this, you could argue that it's not necessarily a good thing to just lose weight. It's what you want to do is try and guarantee that a certain amount, or you ideally, in an ideal world, you want all the weight you lose to be body fat and not to lose any muscle mass. That's almost impossible to do that, but you want to try and help it along the way. So if we also know, therefore, that if you have a higher protein diet or a high protein diet, you can and will protect existing muscle tissue that you have when dieting, okay, or when trying to lose weight. So what that means is that if you have a higher protein diet, any weight you do lose, a higher percentage of that weight will be fat mass as opposed to muscle mass. It won't be exclusively fat mass because that's not really going to happen, but it'll be a higher percentage of it will be fat. However, now this isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it's not a bad thing, I don't think. If you're protecting the muscle, okay, the overall weight loss that you may achieve when following that sort of diet may be less. So you might actually lose less weight. However, the majority of the weight you do lose would be fat mass as opposed to muscle mass. So that is a positive outcome, okay, because if you've got less weight loss, but the type of weight loss is high quality because it's mainly fat, it also means that you have less of a drop in metabolic rate, because if there's less weight loss, as we've mentioned, there's less adaptation required. So there's less overall basic metabolic rate loss. Okay, hope that makes sense. And what that means is, well, it means you don't need to adapt as strictly or as quickly, or you don't need to like acutely reduce your intake further if your starting point's higher and it's not dropping as quickly. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Thirdly, maybe, I've mentioned at the start that body composition doesn't really make a major difference to basic metabolic rate for two weights. So 14 stone is 14 stone in terms of basic metabolic rate, by and large, regardless of whether it's mainly muscle or fat or made up of that. Okay, so it doesn't make a massive difference, but what it does do is make a difference to other things. So obviously, if you have a larger percentage of muscle mass, the chances are you'll be able to do more work in terms of physical activity. So the sessions, the amount of work you can do, the amount of lifting you can do, you will be greater than someone who's the same weight but maybe is carrying more body fat versus the amount of muscle compared to you, or compared to a version of you. So therefore, the amount of energy expenditure within a session or within a day will be greater. And that is something called non-exercise thermogenesis, exercise thermogenesis, or non-activity exercise thermogenesis. And that is because I've said basic metabolic rate is your baseline, but then there's things that contribute to then increasing the amount of energy you burn in a given day. And we've said exercise, but probably the most overlooked aspect of it is like your non-exercise activity, just moving about, walking about as well, and doing things like that. So you've got your exercise type of things, but then you've got your non-exercise things. And if you've got more muscle, if you're a more muscular build, when I say muscular, I don't mean like a tank, like a super athlete. I just mean if you've got a bit more muscle in your frame by doing a bit of resistance training, for example, you'll probably, on a subconscious level, just do more work on a daily basis. And when I say do more work, I just mean you'll move about more. I know it sounds silly, but this fidgeting, moving about, standing up, moving your arms like this, all this kind of thing, that requires expenditure of energy. And over the course of the day, a week, a month, it adds up. Getting up and down from your chair, moving about the house. These are the sort of things that that may seem insignificant, but they're actually really significant. And what we also know One of the biggest adaptions that occurs from adaptive thermogenesis when you're on a diet is that you do a lot less on a subconscious level. So you may well sit on the couch for an hour longer than you realise, like, or you may well walk about during the day a lot less than you are aware of even doing, because it's not a conscious choice, it's just subconsciously what happens when you're dieting or when you're trying to lose weight quite aggressively, because the body's trying to protect what it has. So it will do things almost on a non-voluntary basis. There's things you do on a voluntary basis, like make food, eat food, go to the gym, go to a class. These are voluntary things you're doing, but it's actually sometimes the subconscious non-voluntary things that are going to have the biggest impact. And they have actually studied it, so I'm not just making this up. They've studied it in some of the studies. Obviously, at the end of the day, science can be quite varied in terms of the findings and stuff, but ultimately, what they have found is that one of the main things that happens through adaptive thermogenesis is that the amount of like non-exercise activity or non-conscious activity, if you want to call it that, it reduces by up to 50%, which is significant. It's a lot. It's a huge amount, which could equate to anywhere from 300 to 500 or 600 calories a day of energy, which is massive, absolutely massive. So that's going to have an impact. So the reason I'm pointing that out is, again, I've probably got a couple of reasons for wanting to point that out. One is that you need to be sort of consciously mindful of that, and it might be an idea to set yourself a daily target for. That's when setting yourself daily targets for like steps might actually be quite handy, because you'd be amazed that you actually might end up doing less in terms of general activity and moving about and stuff when you're trying to diet or when you're going to the gym a couple of times a week. Probably both on a conscious and subconscious level. On a conscious level, I mean, you might go to the gym for an hour and then think, yes, that was a great workout, I'm just going to chill on the couch this tonight. Whereby if you hadn't gone to the gym for that hour, maybe you would have gone out a walk with your pals or something like that, you know, and kind of like, and I'm talking purely about an energy perspective here, kind of counteracted it. So it's stuff like that that might be worth being aware of, and taking note of maybe the amount of activity that you do or the amount of steps you usually walk, and then try to make sure that you can maintain a consistent amount, like throughout the times when you're maybe more tired or lacking in energy. Because at the end of the day, if you're trying to like lose weight or whatever and exercising lots, you will start to lack energy, because you're in a sort of that sort of state. So therefore, it's something to be really aware of and mindful of. It's also another argument or reason to not be too strict with your, like, try to go on diets and have vegetables and steamed chicken every day, because it's not going to really be beneficial to you longer term, and you might end up just like undoing or counteracting it with in other ways, even on a subconscious level. So another thing that I wanted to try and touch on regarding all this and to do with the protein and the activity and the metabolic rate is that's why, like, when it comes to when you're trying to achieve like bodies, if you want to try and focus on body compositional changes, and i.e. getting leaner, losing a bit of body fat, eating better, this is another reason why, like, ultimately some form of resistance training is the absolute number one priority when it comes to exercise. So the only thing, like, the body adapts in different ways to different things. Okay, we've talked a bit about adaptations. There is not a single like outcome of exercise where the primary like outcome is weight loss. Like, that's not ever going to be an adaptation of exercise. It can happen as a result of like other factors all contributing, but in terms of like strict specific context, like, exercise shouldn't be seen as a primary tool for weight loss, because that's not one of its primary responses. Okay, our body's primary responses to exercise isn't necessarily that. There's a correlation, but it's not a cause. I mean, if this might sound slightly confusing, I'll try my best to try and explain what I mean. So, for example, if you strength train, like, the whole point of lifting weights is to try and create a stimulus on the muscles, so that their response to that is to adapt, and the adaptation of that is to get a little bit stronger, so that they're capable of like managing the load that you place upon it the previous week or the previous 2 weeks. And over time, you start to adapt to the weight that you're able to lift. And eventually, the adaptation process stops. So it's very similar. There's an adaptation process. Same way weight loss eventually stops because your body adapts. It responds to the new amount of food you're consuming versus the amount of energy you spend. It adapts by then dropping your metabolic rate. The same concept works with strength training. Once your body adapts to the stimulus of weight and load by becoming stronger, it can then manage it, and it will just stay there now. It will just stay because the body just wants to stay where it is unless you constantly stimulate it to further or stimulus is out with its current sort of abilities, I guess. So that's why it then stays, and then that's why you need to overload it again with a heavier weight, and then it takes a few weeks, maybe 3 or 4 weeks, and then eventually that repeated stimulus once or twice a week, the body then learns, right, this is going to come for me again, this weight, I need to get stronger so I can deal with it, and then it does, and then it tails off, and then so that's the whole idea of progressive overload. You need to progressively, systematically, gradually overload the body, and that's why it's just a continuous cycle. You can't rush it though. You cannot rush it, and that's why like strength training programs for Olympians, 4 years they'll write them 4 years in advance because they know they can't rush the process. You can't speed it up, and that's how, for example, in a 12-week block, I know I guarantee you'll be able to get stronger, but you need a certain amount of time. You only get so strong in that time, but then if you do it again and again and again, it will just gradually, it can increase. It's not always linear, but that's the basic premise of it. Okay, so strength training, your adaptation, the body's adaptation is to get stronger to the load. Aerobic fitness, if you go out and run, you're putting your heart and lungs under duress. If you do it consistently, the body is like, crap, we need to adapt to this stress. This is a stress in our body. We need to adapt. Let's adapt. We'll grow and build and we'll get fitter. We'll create mitochondria in the muscles. We'll be able to carry more oxygen. And that's what it does. So the adaptation process of aerobic exercise is improved fitness. Yes, there's other benefits that come with it. Of course there is. But that's the adaptation there. Flexibility. You want to get more flexible. You do flexibility routines, mobility routines, stretching routines. And over time, the body adapts by becoming more flexible. So that the next time you go to stretch it in a position, it's no longer like, oh my God, that's really tight, because it's adapted and it can do it more effortlessly. So that's again why becoming more flexible takes time. You can't rush that either. I'm trying to think. Same goes with power. And when it comes to fitness and exercise, there isn't that much more to it. Like, you can only get fitter aerobically, faster in terms of speed, stronger in terms of strength, stronger, fitter, faster, more flexible, and that's the cornerstones really. I'm probably missing one obvious one, but that's the cornerstones. Not weight loss. It doesn't exist. There's no adaptation. That's not. But it's been jumped on with kind of, because it burns energy. So it burns energy, therefore, right, do lots of exercise, you're going to lose lots of weight. No. Try and remember that an adaptation to exercise will not be weight loss, but it will be, or it can be, muscle gain. You can build muscle. You cannot guarantee at all fat loss from exercise. You can't do it because there's too many other variables, depending on what you eat being the main one, or what you drink, or what you're doing when you go home from the gym. So there's all these factors like that will determine it. But you can almost guarantee you can gain muscle if the stimulus is in place, the overload's in place. You can almost guarantee you'll get aerobically fitter if the stimulus is in place, because these are the adaptations. So try and almost view exercise as what you're doing to become a better athletic person in terms of like fitness, strength, physically more capable, and obviously the mental side of it, psychological benefits are huge as well. But from a fat loss perspective, a lot of it is going to come down to like what you're consuming and the makeup of that consumption. So it's not just a case of I'm just going to go on 1,000 calorie a day diet, because if you do, the adaptation will come down fast, which you don't want, because the body will just, where are you going to go after your body adapts? Where can you go? You can't just keep eating less, because eventually you'll hit a brick wall. And if you're not considering like the amount or the type of foods or the macronutrients, proteins, carbs, fats, if you're not considering them and you're just having 1,000 calories of anything you want, and there's not a consideration for protein, a higher percentage of the weight loss that you do achieve will be muscle mass, which is not what you want, because it will have a less positive effect on your body composition. You'll be less capable physically. The more extreme you go, obviously, like if you've got maybe a lot of weight to lose, then there's going to be a higher percentage of fat to begin with that you'll lose anyway. But the more extreme you go, the more of an issue it will be. So that's some of the things I wanted to try and just kind of like put across, in the hope that it kind of makes sense from a practical point of view. Like, what that means is, we said try and aim for between 1.5 and 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Now, these are ballpark figures. I know I use that phrase a lot, right? These are ballpark figures, and which you should aim for. They don't guarantee anything. Nothing is guaranteed in terms of like success or whatever. But there's, as I said, there's these things that you can do that will make it more likely. So the 1.5 grams to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight will help achieve the things that we mentioned already. It will reduce the ghrelin effect, the hunger hormone. Okay, so it will combat that. It will fight against that. So you'll be less likely to then, or you'll find it easier to sustain or adhere and not get hungry and get cravings all the time. Doesn't guarantee it, but it will help you. It's like a tool that can help. It might also mean that even on a subconscious level, you eat less overall. So you might think that every time you eat food, it's a conscious decision, but a lot of the time it's not. And a lot of the time it can be almost predetermined by what you've eaten for breakfast and for lunch, or just before you go for dinner. Like if you've got a sort of decent protein intake throughout the day, even if you don't realise it, you'll be less likely, you might, to have more of what you would have if you had a low protein intake, for example. And an extreme example of that would be if you didn't eat all day at all. Chances are you'd be really hungry. If you're really hungry, you probably, unless you've got an enormous amount of willpower, but again, that won't last you more than a few weeks, you're probably not going to want a bit of salmon. Do you know what I mean? If you've not eaten hardly all day or at all, you're going to crave something a lot more palatable, probably like, I don't know, pizza or a takeaway or a donut with coffee, something that's going to give you a quick fix because you've not eaten all day. So there's a preemptive nature to eating a higher protein diet as well. Again, it doesn't all have to be dried chicken. Like, on a practical level, I'm just going to give a couple of basic examples. Okay, so for example, after the running session at the weekend, an ideal breakfast, or any morning really, would maybe be a protein shake and a bowl of porridge. There's an example. Or wholemeal toast with poached eggs. Okay, that's another example. For lunch and dinner, a few folk we were talking about were struggling for ideas, and I was saying, like, one of the things that I've noticed is that obviously when I started all this like 11, 12 years ago, I didn't have any of the issues or difficulties that present themselves when you have like 4 children and a mortgage and all these sort of things to sort of like, and just running about all day. So the practical implications for food change, right? So one of the things that I personally find really convenient is, for those 2 things really, packets of chicken, for example. So I'll sort of like often stock my fridge with like packets of flavoured chicken, because the boys like them as well. So like, they'll have sandwiches with like they can be quite fussy sometimes. So like chicken, like sweet chili chicken or barbecue chicken or Mexican chicken. So I'll just buy packets of that. Depending on where you go, you can get a decent price for quite a lot. So that might do a sandwich for lunch, for example. Or a snack, even like a wholemeal, I don't know, like a toasted sandwich with some chicken in it, or and coleslaw or something like that. As long as there's a bit of coleslaw, not go mad on it. Another example, we tend to buy now a lot of breaded chicken, or we make breaded chicken, but again, I'll make breaded chicken if there's time, but often there's not time, so we'll just buy like packets of breaded chicken. the boys love them, and they're quite convenient. I know that if I'm not wanting to, like, if I want to have a decent wee bit of food, but I've not got time to really cook something, a couple of those breaded chicken things, you chuck them in the oven for 20 minutes. And again, depending on the time you've got, you could cut them into wee bits, put them in a wrap with some salad, or add them to a stir fry. Or again, quite a common lunch if I'm rushing about, I would just, if I not get time, if I'm dealing with Danny, who you can't put down at the moment at all, maybe chuck it in the oven. 20 minutes later, take it out, and I'll have, because I'm very active, I need to try and, I actually sometimes struggle to get enough food in without feeling lethargic, and then I'll just grab biscuits and sweets at the end of the day. So maybe like 3 slices of wholemeal bread with chicken in between, maybe some grated cheese or maybe some coleslaw, whatever's in the fridge. And that way, like, it's tasty, it's got a decent nutrient profile, and it's not full of crap really, and it's got a decent protein intake as well. It's providing me a bit of energy, there's a bit of fat in the cheese, a bit of fat in the coleslaw, decent like complex carbohydrate intake with the wholemeal bread. So these are the things that are worth considering. It's totally different when you're going for like a 10-week blitz and you just want to cut everything out, but again, that's not really what it's about for me anymore. Like, I understand people want quick results, but because of everything we've mentioned, it's difficult probably to maintain long term. So yeah, these are the sort of practical things to consider. It doesn't need to be all perfect food made from scratch. When you get the time to, great. Okay, so I'll try and prioritise once a day, or 5 days out of 7 anyway, a stir fry. I just think stir fry, it's dead easy, dead simple. You can get a lot of veg in there, get whatever you want in there, really, chicken, noodles or rice, and the rest of the days and the meals can be kind of built around that. It doesn't have to be like perfect though. If you've got nowhere to go except a Greg's, try and choose a decent, like, look, instead of a pastry, you look, right, well, that's a decent looking wholesome chicken sandwich, I'm going to have that with some salad. That looks nice, it's got a big bit of salad in it, so you can get decent stuff like that. But yeah, these are just some of the things I think we were covering. I'm not sure how useful on a practical level this may be. I don't know how insightful it is to know about the whole process of adaptive thermogenesis, but hopefully it will help give you a bit of an understanding of one of the reasons why actually, like, rapid weight loss isn't that desirable, and adaptive thermogenesis is one of those things. Forgot to mention, what I'll mention now, is that another thing about adaptive thermogenesis is, for the most part, we go on predictions, don't we? Like, so if you're this weight and you do this amount of activity, you'll type it into MyFitnessPal, or you'll type it into like the Hadis Benedict formula on Google, and it'll give you roughly the amount of calories you need per day or something. But adaptive thermogenesis is also partly to do with the unpredictable changes in metabolism that no formula can account for. So it's not as simple as following a calorie model for that. That's one reason why it's not as simple as following a calorie model for that reason. And also because there's mixed research that's also indicative of one of the reasons why they think that yo-yo weight gain is a thing, and also, so that's one of the reasons why yo-yo weight gain is a thing. Because if you go on a really strict 800 to 1000 calorie a day diet, what happens after that? If your metabolism is responding by coming down to a weight that is dictated to by the 800 to 1000 calorie a day diet, you can't stay in that diet forever. Presumably you're not going to. So this is your new baseline. But if you go back to normal eating, now you're overeating. So then your weight just keep back up because it adapts, it responds to the new consumption by regaining the weight. So that's one of the main reasons or arguments, or what they think is the reason for a lot of yo-yo dieting. So then you've regained the weight, quick diet, 1000 calories, excellent. I've lost weight, but what happens when you lose weight? This comes down, your basic metabolic rate, because it is directly linked to I'm getting mixed up. Your weight is directly linked to your basic metabolic rate. So then you go back to normal again because your holiday's over. So now you don't care as much. Let's go back to normal eating, regain the weight. And it just kind of goes up and down. A lot of folk, I think, just kind of, we all do it to an extent. I think I do it as well, but it fluctuates and it becomes more extreme. Some people, it's more extreme than others. But there's another part of it that's unfortunate, and it's a bit inconclusive, but one of the things that they think about adaptive thermogenesis as well is that it's not predictable. It doesn't go back to what it used to be the more you yo-yo diet, your metabolism. So what I mean by that is it comes down, you then regain the weight, so now at the same weight you were before you dieted, then your metabolism starts to creep back up, but it stops a wee bit short of where it was before. So in other words, in order to maintain your old regained weight, you now need to eat a bit less. So in other words, it makes it harder because you don't actually, your metabolism doesn't go back up to what it was previously to maintain the same weight. That's a real problem because it makes it harder and harder for you because you get less and less room to maneuver. But at the same time, that is also probably a good reason to not focus purely on weight loss, because what could you do? You could think, right, I'm going to alter my metabolism in a positive way, my basic metabolic rate in a positive way. I know if I gain a little bit of weight, it means I can afford to eat a bit more. I don't want to gain unwanted weight, though, fat. So what will I do? Well, if I gain a couple of pounds of muscle, if I strength train, I gain some muscle, and you can positively influence it in that way. So that's another reason why when you're training, I wouldn't make weight loss your main focus of progress. Like, don't check your scales all the time because you are training with weights. So there's a chance that your weight kind of doesn't fluctuate too much. You might lose some body fat. But you might be offsetting it with a wee bit of muscle gain. So what's happening? Your weight loss stays the same. So your weight loss stays the same. What's the bonus of that? Your basic metabolic rate also stays the same. So you don't need to adapt. You don't need to adapt by eating less because your weight's the same. Where was I going with that? What does change though? Well, you've lost a bit of fat, you've gained a bit of muscle, so your body composition has improved. It has to have improved because your weight's still the same. So although you've not changed weight, you've lost some fat, you've gained some muscle, body composition has improved. It's gone from 30% to 27%. If that happens, muscle takes up less space per pound than fat, so you'll get smaller. And that's one of the reasons why people can end up dropping a dress size when they train with weights and not lose any weight in the scales. That's an example of why that happens. Okay. And what else is happening? If you're gaining muscle because you're training, you're gaining fitness because you're training, and you're also fueling the workouts, you are then burning off. Like, you're getting fitter, so you're able to do more work within the sessions. But also because you've got more muscle, you've got a more active body. More muscle means you're more active, means you'll have more energy. So you'll end up walking about more, you'll end up playing for 10 minutes more in the garden, for example, with your kids. If you've got kids, you'll play with 10 minutes longer with them, even though you think it's a conscious choice to play for 10 minutes longer. A lot of the time it's because it's taking you 10 minutes longer to get tired enough to say, right, I'm going for a wee break, I need a cup of tea. Right? So stuff like that. And if you don't have kids, it's the same idea. If you're going out, like whatever you're doing, going a big walk, you might walk a bit further, you might do, I can't think, there's loads of things. So these are the things to think about. I'm just trying to, I suppose I'm slightly rambling, pretending I'm talking to a pal here, but I'm just talking to the screen. But these are the sort of things that are worth sort of contemplating, because all these sort of training modalities ultimately just make you more athletic. They make you more capable. It's not about just weight loss, and aesthetics are just the sort of byproduct. I get that's the main reason why everyone does it, but ultimately the real benefits are out with all that, like being able to move more freely, to be able to get up from a seat easier, to be able to like get from A to B faster, to run somewhere without feeling absolutely exhausted, to climb to the top of a set of steps and not then have to stand for 30 seconds to get your breath back. These are real life things, and you just feel a bit more capable in yourself, you know. So there's a lot to it. I could go on for hours talking about it. I'm just trying to like reduce some of the main points that we covered last week, and I think I better stop now because I'll just go on and on and just start rambling. So yeah, hopefully that makes a bit of sense. If any of it actually raises more questions and answers, please just ask. Yeah, so I think there's probably quite a few things that I've missed, but anyway, I better go for now. See you.